afternoon, everybody. I'm Rachel from Vested. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to today's webinar. We're thrilled to have you all here as we dive into a conversation about the exciting world of consultancy and business growth. So we've got two incredible experts joining us today, Mark Jansen and Adam Hadley. They both bring years of experience, deep insights, and a wealth of knowledge to the table. So get ready for a fascinating discussion. So just a couple of intros. So Mark is founder of the Consultancy Growth Network, a community designed to support and accelerate the growth of boutique consulting businesses. With a background of leading performance improvement programs for major brands like Sky, O2 and Barclays, Mark has got extensive experience in the consulting industry, having run an award-winning consultancy firm called Blue Sky for 17 years. And has also advised in excess of 75 consulting firms since his exit in 2015. After selling it, Mark identified a gap in the market for a thriving community that could provide consulting business owners with the insights, expert advice, and connections they need to succeed. Adam, CEO of QuantSpark, a strategic consultancy focused on transformation through analytics and AI, very topical. Leading an entrepreneurial team of data scientists, analysts, and engineers, he orchestrates initiatives to optimize high-value, complex processes to enhance operational efficiency and bolster profitability. Adam's also the founder and executive director of Tech Against Terrorism, a public-private partnership dedicated to disrupting terrorists online. The UN Security Council has recognized it for enabling the global tech sector to tackle the terrorist use of the internet and respecting human rights. And last year, Adam was appointed a CBE by King Charles III for services to tackling terrorist content online. Congratulations. Today, we'll be talking about everything from the challenges of scaling a business to the opportunities and impact of AI in the consultancy world. Please do drop any questions you've got in the Q&A chat box as we go along. It's always good to have questions as they're relevant to the conversation we're having. And if you want to drop anything in the chat, if you want to introduce yourselves as we go along, that's fine too. So without further ado, let's dive in. Mark and Adam, thank you both for joining us today. I'm excited to get started. So let's kick things off with a question for you both. You can fight about who's going to answer it first. So to start with, could you each share a bit about your journey in the consultancy world? What sparked your interest in the field and how did you get where you are today?
Oh, shall I go as I'm off mute? I guess what sparked my interest, I've always been one, I love problem solving. That's essentially what I enjoy doing. And I think that's really at the heart of consulting. Also genuinely interested in business and in very different types of business. And I've always said the role of a consultant is a really privileged one because we get the opportunity to go in and explore different businesses, diagnose their problems. And for some reason, they listen to you because you're coming in from the outside, whereas if you're working internally, they probably wouldn't listen quite so much. So yeah, I worked with PepsiCo originally, had an operational role. I trained as a chartered accountant before that with Pricewaterhouse, and then went into consulting around 28, 29 years of age with my sister and another lady, and there were three of us who built then consulting business, as you mentioned, called Blue Sky, that we sold to Capita in 2013. So that's kind of a bit of context, I guess, in terms of what brought me into consulting and the role.
Brilliant. And do you work with other family-run businesses?
So now, having sold, crikey, I can't believe it's 2013 we sold, 2015 we completed the earn-out. So it's 10 years since I exited Blue Sky. And just in time for the for owners of boutique consulting firms and helping them accelerate their growth journey and hopefully enjoy that journey a little bit more than they might if they didn't have access to all of the guidance that we offer.
Brilliant, thank you. Adam, how about you?
Well, what a great question. First of all, thanks a lot for organising today. It's great to be supporting this, and also It's quite something to be on the same webinar as Mark, someone I have a huge amount of respect for the work that he's been doing in the Consultancy Growth Network and beyond. So my path is kind of a slightly weird one, but in terms of what I find so valuable about consulting is, as Mark was saying, problem solving, the power of being an outsider as well. That so many organizations, whether they're government or private sector, really need that fresh external perspective to help them get things done quickly and effectively. And I think as a consultant, as an external trusted advisor, you can achieve a huge amount if it's framed in the right way. My own journey into consulting was initially a deliberate one. That I worked in a few startups. It was all a bit chaotic and good fun, and learned a lot. But I wanted a slightly more rigorous introduction to problem solving in a business context, and for me, consulting seemed the right thing to do. And I worked for a few years at quite a small consultancy called Value Partners, which was not doing particularly well, which was great for me as a junior because it meant I had a lot of experience that otherwise I wouldn't have had unless I'd been a lot older. So it sort of supercharged my career. And my journey in setting up QuantSpark was primarily actually based on converting quite a lot of my own freelance data science and analytics work into my own company. And I managed to convince a couple of people to join and as freelancers, and then turn them into employees. And the rest is history.
Brilliant, thank you. So, I mean, you've both mentioned that you love problem solving. I imagine you've had some challenges and your own problems to solve on your journey. What were some of the biggest hurdles you faced early on, and how did you overcome them? Is it harder to solve your own problems than other people's?
I think it's yeah, I mean, there's a danger you get too close to it. We were quite lucky in the early stages, to be fair. So the first 3 years of the business, we kind of went from zero to, I mean, it's a long time ago now. 2.5 million turnover was quite considerable growth. I worked out in today's money that would be 0 to 7.5 million in 3 years. And then so our main issue was frankly keeping up with demand in those early years. But then in year 4 we dropped back to from 2.5 to 1.5, or equivalent from like 7 to sort of 4 million, which is quite a significant drop. And that was probably our first kind of test as a leadership team, and as a I mean, I wouldn't even say leadership team, as a team, right? We were a small collective really doing the work that we were doing with, as we realized at that point, no clear strategy, frankly, no sales and marketing plan. And when some of our we'd been successful in winning some major clients, and then when a couple of those fell away, revenues dropped. And so what we did actually, which is quite weird, is we hired a consultant. So we brought in a strategy consultant to review and make recommendations. And I'll never forget, actually became a good friend. He joined the company in the end and then left, but he's still a good friend. But I remember Simon's quote was, "You're smart people in a dumb market." So basically, you've been successful just really because you happen to be in the right place at the right time. So thank you very much for that. But that challenge of suddenly finding the fact that your revenues are dropping, the people that you've employed, you're kind of now questioning, can you afford to keep them? Was quite a major challenge 3 years in. But as I say, we hired this strategy consultant, and then we went on a journey to I guess professionalize our approach to growing our business, which involved developing a sales strategy, a marketing strategy, and getting clarity around our positioning, and so on.
And is that a challenge that many consultancies that you work with face, that you get to a certain size and then you need to kind of take a step back and look at what you need to put in place?
Well, I would say the majority of firms in their early years have a relatively high degree of dependency on 1 or 2 clients. That is often the way that consulting businesses will grow. And there will come a time, unfortunately, where that 1 client or 2 clients steps back or reduces their spend. And so, yes, that challenge is absolutely very familiar to a lot of the members in our network. In addition, what happens is, as consulting entrepreneurs who love problem solving, we get distracted we'll do whatever the client wants for us, right? So the client starts with an initial request, then they think, oh, crikey, you've done a good job of that. Can you do this? Can you do the other? And the answer is generally yes. And the result of that is you end up with an eclectic bunch of different service lines, things that you are capable of doing that probably not the best in the world at. And I know we ended up just 3 years in, we had like 21 different services that we could offer to a client, which of course means you can't take that to market. And you can't be really truly expert in those things. So again, you find yourselves in a position, and this is really common, in a position where you need to start niching down and focusing in on the things that A, you're really good at, and B, the market really needs.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, were your initial challenges similar to Mark's or completely different?
Well, I mean, Mark is the expert in this, and I completely agree with everything he said. I mean, it's all too real, considering I'm, still experiencing some of the challenges and a member of the Consultancy Growth Network as well. I think that all resonates with me. I would say many consultancies find the first few years fairly straightforward. If you've got traction, if you've got a few great clients, that's kind of, obviously, if you know what you're doing, that's the easy bit. What is much harder is a few years later when those initial anchor clients, kind of, maybe you've done what you need to do with them. Maybe they go to a competitor. Who knows? I think the real test of your mettle comes when those initial clients fade away, and how do you replace them? And to Mark's point, how do you remain focused? At QuantSpark, we've kind of been forced to update our proposition a few times, almost against our will, as a result of being at that front edge of analytics and AI. It's been quite a ride, actually, because a lot of the advances in AI have been replacing our proposition on a monthly basis. So a lot of things we used to do can just be automated now. So we've kind of been forced to evolve our offering quite quickly, which is stressful. But I think it's kind of done that proposition testing for us, because we've had to update what we're doing almost all the time. Whereas I suspect consultancies are maybe not quite in that space, have a little bit more freedom to to continue what they're doing. And I think that really is a struggle, both dealing with that transition from your anchor clients, but also finding a way to innovate. And it's the innovator's dilemma, I suppose, or first mover advantage. I often think this about Pret, the sandwich brand. There's not a lot they can really do to improve what they're doing, because if they change their sandwiches too much, they'll lose their existing customers. But unless they innovate, they obviously are not going to do very well in the future. To be clear, I don't know anything about Pret's finances, but I think there is a challenge there that any business can have, which is, how do you change enough to adapt to the changing market dynamics, but without alienating your existing client base?
Yeah, well, do you know what I was going to ask you, sort of a follow-on from that, which is, consultancies do often face the challenge of staying ahead of market trends, and how can you anticipate shifts in client expectations, as well as future-proofing your business and the businesses that you work with?
Well, just riffing on the point that Mark made, I think that there is a point about, to what extent do you want to lead or follow? And there are times, of course, when you're a consultant, you've got to follow what the client's saying. But there are other times where you've got to lead and show, well, this is the way forward, and these are the things you need to do. And getting that right balance, I think, is extremely difficult. Do you lead or do you follow? And how do you vary that on a consistent basis? Because if you follow too much, of course, you end up not having a particularly compelling proposition. But if you lead too much, no one's really interested. You're perhaps potentially, ahead of the times. And that's a real challenge where AI is concerned, or generative AI in particular, because it's almost like the market still isn't quite ready to invest in some of these technologies. So it's a tricky balance to strike, I'd say.
Yeah.
Can I ask Adam, I'm interested, have you ended up, would you say, with a more compelling proposition as a result of the work that you've done? Because
I would say so, but the word, it depends how you define compelling. Whether compelling is commercially viable or not is a separate matter. And Rach, going back to your introduction, I also have the privilege of running a not-for-profit that is quite activist and does a lot to remove terrorist content online. And that has a bit of a startup mentality. There's a lot more activists than a normal private sector consultancy would be, but it's interesting to see that sort of juxtaposition. But Mark, to your point, in terms of being compelling, I think we've all got to really understand what clients might be asking for next year or the year after, but without kind of surprising people too much, because otherwise they wouldn't be interested in paying. And your point about a dumb market, I think, also applies without wanting to be condescending or arrogant. That's the fine balance to strike, isn't it, really? Because we want to lead, but we don't want to scare our clients away. We want to support and understand the pain points, but we don't want to be arrogant. So all of these sort of trade-offs, I think, as a consultancy, make it a tremendously interesting and rewarding thing to do.
Yeah, and from a personal point of view, Adam, just talking about your activism, how do you need to switch it off when you're working for the nonprofit or rather on and then off when you're working with your clients? Is it your natural kind of state to be an activist?
Well, I think the key thing is to all successful endeavors is clear purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that applies quite a bit to a consultancy in the private sector or a not-for-profit in the public sector or third sector. So I think purpose is essential. And I know one of the things, Rachel, you want to talk about is retention. For me, purpose is essential. And it's the same with clients. If clients really understand what your purpose is and how you can help, then everything flows from that. And the proposition should be simplified as a result. But finding that purpose, especially in such a volatile world where technology is sort of chomping a lot of what we do all the time, and the law of economic uncertainty, but articulating and sticking to that purpose takes quite a bit of courage.
Yeah, and is that something you help your clients really kind of nail down what their purpose is, or does it tend to come from them naturally?
Well, I'd be interested in Mark's perspective on this, because to a certain extent, I think regardless of the specific discipline of consultancy, it's always the case that clients who've had the opportunity to think through their own strategy and the purpose of what they're trying to do are always the best clients. But often, I think there are adjacent sort of disciplines that we have to indulge in occasionally to support our clients with articulating their strategy before they even think about investing in AI and analytics. And I'm sure there are parallels in different consulting verticals as well, that you can't just dive in and do your specialism often. You sometimes have to work with the client to prepare their environment, to prepare the kind of the sociology of their company, so it's ready for the particular specialism or expertise that you have.
Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was interesting you used the language there, preparing the environment, Adam, because that was something. So one of the things that we did as a business was, I think something that people should kind of hopefully take away from this is that proposition development is not a one-off exercise. It's an iterative process, and it's a continual process, actually. And in the early days, our focus as a consulting business was about sales and service transformation. And that was about that interaction between the customer and between that member of staff. How could you optimize that? And of course, you can train the person to have a great conversation, but actually, how are they measured? How are they managed? How are they rewarded? And you go back into the processes, then you go back into management capability, and then you end up with, okay, how is it the organization being led and structured? And what is the strategy, right? So then it all comes back down to that interaction to improve, whether it's a sales or service interaction. And so by listening to clients and truly understanding their problems and identifying when your first project goes well, but it could have gone better, what were the other levers you didn't get the chance to pull that you could have done to enable you to extend your proposition, increase your average value that you're selling to your clients, such that you can make a bigger impact, have more influence and control on the end game, but also charge more as a result. And that, for me, is a key kind of part of the evolution, typically, of your average consulting business. And that comes from, having clarity of purpose. So in that case, our purpose was very much about driving that interaction between the customer and that call center agent or that member of staff in a retail shop. So having absolute clarity of purpose of what you're there to do, but being really not sticking to just, well, we do that because we're good at it, but actually recognizing all the other influencing factors and building capability then to support clients in solving those problems as well.
Yeah, thank you. And we've just got a question here to both of you that's come through on the chat. How have you encouraged your team to experiment with generative AI, and what's helped drive real adoption internally? I mean, I know both of you, Mark, at the last Consultancy Growth Network Summit, the whole theme was around AI. I know you sort of use it internally as well.
Sure. So I will give a layperson's answer, and I'll let Adam give a more technical answer. So in simple terms, we've put the whole team's been on training to get a base level of AI capability. We've gone through their roles to look at how they can use AI to drive efficiency and effectiveness. As a 50, 60-year-old partial technophobe, even I have embraced it. In fact, we're developing, which we're really excited about, an AI agent, which I'm told is going to be my twin, my avatar. And essentially, we're training it on all of the content and knowledge that we have within the Consultancy Growth Network. So not just my knowledge, but that from all of our specialist providers, our experts, people who've kind of built successful consulting businesses. So that knowledge will be sitting within our AI avatar, and we're looking to make that available to our members in the not too distant future, which is very exciting.
Wow, keep us posted. Brilliant. I didn't think that was that lay. But Adam, what's your take on it?
Well, in terms of Gen AI adoption internally in the consultancy,
yeah.
So we've deployed our own version of ChatGPT internally called ChatQS, which everyone has an account for, and we have internal training. But more than that, we're thinking about fundamentally what are the things you do as a consultant that can be augmented or indeed fully automated, and then creating internal playbooks for this, because there are so many things that historically would take quite a lot of time to do, can just be done very well, very quickly. So, for example, it could be sketching out slide decks, doing QA on slide, nothing more tedious than looking through slide decks for typos and all these sorts of things. But those sorts of things can now be fully automated. So there's a sort of a spectrum of things that we do, and as you might imagine, given our main service is building AI tools for our clients, we try to do this internally as well. So everything from kind of small but still meaningful productivity enhancements on a day-to-day basis, all the way through to building out quite well-defined use cases. For example, using ChatGPT deep research to do quite detailed research on a particular topic that can save days or weeks, and listing all these sort of use cases, and then building some of our own quite simple tools or prompt libraries to support it. But fundamentally, I think the challenge with large language models, or Gen AI, ChatGPT, etc., is that they often need a lot more context than people realize, and you need to know what to ask it. So actually, internally and with our clients, we find that the people who use these tools most are actually often people with Mark's level of experience, right? Who you jokingly call yourself a sort of a technophobe and so on, but actually you have deep level of expertise in a particular topic. And often LLMs are very well suited to enhance the productivity of people who are already at the expert level, potentially less useful for those earlier on in their career journey. And perhaps this is something we can come back to, but I think the biggest sort of concern I would have at the moment is those people who historically would start out as an intern or an apprentice and would learn the ropes. Actually, Gen AI is kind of already better than all of those people. So I think there is a genuine question about career progression from junior to expert, and where Gen AI may or may not disrupt that natural progression.
That's definitely one of the risks that's come up, is that where do you learn your craft if AI is doing all the grunt work and you're not there present, taking the notes from those meetings and learnings from what's happening? So it does shift that sort of personal development, professional development, career process. I think that's absolutely right.
So actually, as a slight tangent on, career progression and development, obviously attracting and retaining talent is a key factor in growth and in the success of a consultancy. So what strategies have you both used to build high-performing teams and foster a culture of innovation within your business? Sis?
Do you want to go first on this, Adam? Or
I'd rather not. It's such a difficult
Okay.
question to answer, but happy to. You can go first.
Okay, so it's funny actually because I've been invited to go on a leadership podcast and I've been avoiding it because I feel like a lot of my leadership is quite inherent and not very sort of framework or structured oriented. But I've reflected a little bit on this, and I think a few things struck me. Firstly, when you're small and there's, let's say, 6 to 10 of you, you define your culture by your behavior as a leader. And you define it by the relationship you have. You can stay connected with a small group of people, know where they're at in life, know what's going on for them and how they're getting on with their role and what they need in terms of support. And so it's quite if kind of open and sharing in that way, then it's relatively easy. But when you start, the teams get 20, 30, 40, 50 people, and you bring in a tier of management and you're not directly facing off to all the staff, that's for me when it gets a little bit more challenging. So you need to be more structured. You need to develop your managers and your leaders so that they buy into the culture that you're trying to create. I feel part of that. And you need to proactively invest in developing your cultures, because it won't just happen because you're there. Particularly now when, so much of the work that we do is virtual and we're not even present, to rub off on our people. It does take a more strategic approach. And I think, innovation is just one part of what you might want within your culture. And clearly it's very important. And for me, I guess the key factors are being open to hear anybody from the hierarchy. There is, no hierarchy when it comes to a great idea. You want people to feel like they're heard, but someone needs to also own it and take accountability for driving innovation so that it's on the agenda. And it's directed, to try and solve, again, certain problems or create certain opportunities. But people got to feel like they can share any time. And for me, that was about building a continuous improvement culture that was built on feedback and coaching. So after every meeting I went to with a consultant, I'd be saying to them prior to that meeting, I'm going to expect you to give me feedback after this meeting, and I want both constructive and positive feedback. Okay, so that is my expectation of you, and you can expect the same from me. And this is going to happen every time we go to a meeting together. And then obviously people are really uncomfortable with that in the early stages, but it takes time, and then they get comfortable with it, and then they're more honest with you, and then they give you more constructive feedback. It's more useful. And you create a culture where it's okay to get things wrong. It's okay to improve. And so, yeah, that's, I guess, a few thoughts on leadership, culture and innovation.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose going back to your original point about purpose, and the recruitment process as well, finding people that align with that purpose, and that kind of plays through everything. Absolutely.
Absolutely. We used to, this is going to sound really mean actually, but in the recruitment process, we used to find a reason to give that candidate constructive feedback. So because of part of the process, they will have had to make a presentation, or they'll have answered certain questions where they could have done better. So we would find a reason to give them that feedback, because we wanted to watch how they would react. Because if they react defensively, that gives you a signal. If they ask, oh my God, thank you very much, tell me more, that's the kind of attitude that I wanted in my team. So yeah.
Brilliant. And how do you go about retaining that great talent that you've recruited?
So I think this, hopefully they can see the difference in working for you and being in your business because of the level of openness and connection that people have. Investing in, for the team, certainly we used to do 2-day offsites every quarter, stay overnight somewhere, get people feel really connected. For the leadership team, I think it's important to put effective long-term incentive plans in place. And so Blue Sky was a partnership. So we had rewards and incentives so that people were linked to the overall goals. At the Growth Network, we're a limited company, and so we've put an EMI in place, and obviously we used Vested to do that, which was, I can't say, a seamless process and really appreciated. So yeah, you've got to share I think you have to share the spoils. Because otherwise, there'll be times where they'll be thinking, well, I'm not just here to make the bosses more money, right? So, in fact, I'll just share one quote. I remember we'd set a target of £10 million at some certain point in our journey. And one of my team, Vicky, came to me and said, Mark, why do I care? Why do I care about you hitting your £10 million target? And she was absolutely spot on, because I hadn't done the work to think through why that should matter to the members of the team that weren't necessarily going to benefit by that particular growth. So again, another good leadership lesson. There are many.
There are many. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Adam, over to you. What are your thoughts on, innovation, on, creating a great team and holding on to them?
Well, I certainly think you could write a book on this, and many thousands of people have, because of the complexity of this. And I think there are lots of factors that might influence how you go about building a great team and sustaining that team for long enough. I mean, the main one, I think, is the size of the team. And clearly, as Mark said, if you're a small team, that's very different. If 0 to 10, 1 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 above, they're almost completely different businesses in terms of the culture, systems and processes that need to be in place. Another sort of dependency, I think, really is the culture of the industry, the type of, the industry the consultancy serves. I'd imagine a consultancy in, let's say, media or creative space would be quite different from a consultancy serving financial services. And that kind of sociological context, I think, is really critical differentiator. And I also think in terms of the age group of people too, because depending on the level of seniority that you have in the consultancy, the extent to which you're focused maybe on expert advice versus kind of more sort of doing things, will change things quite considerably. And we know that the different generations, I mean, I'm most definitely millennial, but Gen Z really thinks about things in a completely different way in my experience, and I feel really old, and I'm only sort of mid-30s, feel really old.
Don't say that, Adam.
No,
that's really not fair.
Completely different generation, right? With very different values, not worse or better, but I think quite different values, different frames, different ways of thinking about things, different ways of communicating. Not better or worse, just different. So there's a lot in that question. How do you create a high performing team, and how do you sustain it? But I think Mark's absolutely right. Continuous improvement, openness, transparency, very good feedback. I think part of the challenge, though, is you might inherit lots of cultural artifacts and thinking that are from outside. So I think a lot of the great people I work with have a lot of experience and really know good practice and best practice. But with every hire, you're also importing a bit of their background, a bit of their culture, a bit of what they've seen somewhere else. And there's a paradox here that actually a lot of the less experienced people you might hire come with more of that than you'd expect. So there's quite a lot you've got to do to say, well, actually, we're trying to create a culture of psychological safety. Please do speak up. You won't be criticized. Make mistakes, learn from them. That is actually quite an alien thing to some people, and especially the younger, again, I sound like a granddad. Gen Z, I think, generalizing a bit, are perhaps less comfortable with feedback than older generations may be. Big generalization, so anyone in the Q&A, feel free to disagree with me. But certainly I think actually continuous feedback, continuous improvement, openness is also really important. But there's another thing as well, that high-performing teams and innovation actually requires failure, and it also requires very clear boundaries. And there will be times when people aren't quite the right fit, and recognizing that retention is not just retention actually can be a bad thing and a good thing.
Yeah.
You've got to retain the right people for the right reasons. There's got to be alignment about your purpose as an organization. There's got to be alignment about your ways of working. We might, occasionally hire someone who's much more comfortable in a big company because of the certainty that provides and the psychological safety that provides. And if that happens, we have the conversation and say, maybe you should work somewhere bigger, because actually it's a small company. This is what we're very good at. As a small company, these are the things that we're not very good at. We're working towards them. Help us along that journey, but it might not be right for everyone. So there's quite a lot of complexity to this. And obviously it's all about people. It's all about communication. It's all about listening. It's all about improving.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. Yeah, thank you. And sometimes, as you say, retention is not a good thing. If you both agree that, needs to be in a different place. Just talking about the sort of smaller consultancies versus the larger consultancies, in terms of the generative AI, going back to that, do you think there's a bigger opportunity for smaller consultancies, or does it favour bigger firms with greater infrastructure? So in terms of, yeah, leveling, is AI going to level the field for smaller consultancies? Are there more opportunities there? What are your thoughts on that versus?
So, I mean, look, Adam, you're the expert, so I'll be brief.
You're both experts, Mark.
I would say that on an individual capability level, in terms of using things like ChatGPT, Copilot, and so on, it levels the playing field. But the truth is, when you get into sophisticated application of AI, it requires investment, and that's where, you know, big corporates have the advantage. They can come to firms like QuantSpark and engage them to, you know, implement transformational programs and using generative AI, which the smaller firms just won't be able to do. So I think there's a two-tier answer to that for me.
Thank you.
Because some of it gets quite expensive when you start, you know, training your own large language model, and I don't know how much investment what you've built, Adam, internally, whether that was, like, obviously you've got the resource, I guess, that you when you've got resource on the bench, you could build it yourselves. But what would be an average engagement, AI transformation engagement, you know, from a big corporate? It's hundreds of thousands of pounds, I'm guessing.
Potentially, yeah. I think that there's a paradox here as well, that actually I think the most transformative work that we're involved with has surprisingly little to do with AI, and is often about business process mapping, all that good stuff, which is, you know, quite old school consulting kind of toolbox stuff. I think a lot of that's coming to the fore and is more important now than ever before. So in a sense, when we're thinking about AI, I mean, generative AI, I should stress, we're trying to understand what are those complex processes that are meaningful, that are valuable. And actually, this is where I'm fairly positive and optimistic. That I think the amazing specialist consultancies we have in the UK have all that knowledge. They understand some of these really complex processes like the back of their hand. And I would say that, you know, if you're running or in a leadership position in a consultancy and you have deep knowledge about one particular thing, that there is an opportunity to use generative AI in particular to scale that up and to help build some software in a way that's much cheaper than ever before. So the way I think about generative AI is more about how can we find processes within a business that could be augmented or automated, and how can we apply the deep expertise that someone may have to make that happen more quickly. And certainly I think there's a really old debate about services to product or services to software and all this sort of stuff. But I think generative AI has really kind of quite fundamentally changed that, because you can prototype software much more cheaply than ever before and quicker. And you don't necessarily need a very large budget to start building your own software to scale elements of what you do as a consultant.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it still needs expertise.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to have a chat with anyone who's looking and embarking on that journey. But it's easier now than ever before, but it still does require expertise. But I would actually like to think that as smaller consultancies, we can focus more on that expertise and use that to scale up. But, you know, obviously a lot of this technology is brand new, so it's a bit slightly speculative thing to say. But if you are looking to scale up through building repeatable services, I think now is the time to think about generative AI in helping that journey. But obviously not a cakewalk either, potentially quite difficult, potentially quite expensive, but easier now than ever before.
Yeah, encouraging. Thank you. I'm just looking at some of the questions we've got on the Q&A, not necessarily directly related to what you've just said, but I'm going to start with the first one. So Daniel Piper, thank you. So I've just embarked on my consultancy journey by founding my own business after spending 15 years within a contact center BPO. What would your advice be to win my first client, and how much is reliant on network?
So shall I go? Yep. Do you want to go, Adam, or shall I go?
You go. That's fine.
Yeah. So, I mean, typically people's first client come from network. Yeah, so that would be, but if you don't have much of a network, then obviously you're going to have to get out there and promote yourself and find some new prospects. But I guess the primary thing I would recommend you focus on is your value proposition. So being able to articulate a really compelling value proposition that talks to the pains that your prospective customer is struggling with, or talks to the gains that they are trying to get access to, is the most important thing. And testing that, having conversations with potential, hopefully, 15 years working in a BPO, you must have some contacts. And hopefully, typically people build a consulting offering that's related to their experience and related to their past. So talk to whoever you can get on the phone that's in the kind of target role, whether it's the CIO, CTO, CMO, whoever it is that you're targeting. My recommendation would be say something along the lines of, look, I'm developing a proposition because I believe I can solve X problem or I can add value in a certain way. I would love to run you through this and get your feedback as to whether this is compelling and whether this would excite you. Because you would be my target market and this would be a great opportunity, and let me buy you lunch as a thank you, or something along those lines. And if you could have 20 of those conversations, A, you'll probably get a piece of business, but B, you will fine tune that proposition to a point where you can then go out to market. If your network isn't buying, you can then go out to market with clarity around what's important to your prospective customers.
Great actionable advice there, Mark. Thank you. Adam, did you want to add anything else onto that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always, especially if you're entrepreneurial, which presumably you are if you're setting up your own company, it's finding a balance between being opportunistic and being consistent and disciplined, because the two are not necessarily the same. But I think, to Mark's point, this has to be about understanding where you can add value and understanding I don't like the phrase, but the kind of the pain points. So like, actually, how can you be useful? And that's about listening, and that's about asking lots of questions, and that's about trying stuff out and kind of sharing ideas. But ultimately, it's about understanding the client's requirements. Finding out on my desk, Rachel Healy recommended this on LinkedIn, Guide to Winning Client. I was reading it on holiday. It's actually quite good. And there are loads of these books, and they all have capital letters for some reason. I don't know why. But a lot of what this says is just trying to understand from potential clients what they really need, even if they don't fully know yet. So I think having that sort of dialogue and conversation and being opportunistic as well. And it might be that you support on a slightly different project to begin with, and then you try to kind of move it more towards where you want to go. The other thing I say is that I always keep personally to find opportunities to partner and collaborate. And I think some small consultancies can be their own worst enemy sometimes by competing with one another rather than collaborating. So I think I would say there's one go-to-market, which is through your own network and so on. Another sort of path is to find another consultancy that may have your ideal clients, but not necessarily your expertise. And is there a way of bolting on and kind of piggybacking on what they're doing and collaborating in a particular area? And that might be a faster route to growth than trying to win your own client yourself, because I would imagine other smaller consultancies would be very keen to collaborate on things, certainly much more than the bigger players who are a bit kind of zero sum with things. But I think the smaller ones will be really up for that. And I know a lot of the members of the Consultancy Growth Network are extremely collaborative and looking for opportunities to partner. So Daniel, I'd say with your skills and contact center, I would imagine those sorts of skills would be really in demand, across the board. So I'd reach out to Mark and the Consultancy Growth Network and see if there are any consultancies in that network you might be able to partner with.
Great, thank you. Actually, I remember hearing a while ago about someone was talking about SaaS businesses and comparing it to the pharmaceutical industry and saying that actually painkillers are the painkiller market is about, I don't know, 50 times bigger than the vitamins market. So find a pain and you will, you'll make a lot more money than with your vitamins. So another question, Richard Sterling, what are your thoughts on organic growth versus acquisitions? Or indeed collaborations?
I think it'd be great, Richard, if you're still there to add a little bit more flesh to that bone. Because for me, if acquisitions are an option, so you can access to finance, then absolutely. And I would suggest organic growth always. So it's probably not an either or if you have the ability to do both. Fundamentally, you want to build a business that is growing organically, that, you know, that by the growth itself demonstrates the fact that you've got something of value. But clearly, if you're in a position to acquire and potentially both, you know, like Adam's talking bolt-ons, you know, other businesses with service lines in adjacencies that you can connect and therefore grow your value proposition and solve bigger problems that are higher up the value chain for your customers, then absolutely. There's an inherent risk inevitably of buying consulting businesses that are, you know, people businesses, and making sure that you hold on to those people, because quite often those people have joined that particular business for particular reasons. So yeah, there's certainly, it needs to be done very carefully and strategically. I'd encourage you to get advice if you're going to make those kind of acquisitions. You know, we have a range of M&A, a panel of M&A partners that have worked with our members that come recommended. Happy to introduce you to one if you're going down that road. But yeah, exciting. If you've got those options, then very exciting.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. So Natasha, Ezekiel, is the associate model or employee structure more feasible for business growth with economic instability and changes in technology?
Adam, do you want to have a go at that one first, or?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there are kind of a few points to be unpacked there, and in really interesting question. I think a lot of that would depend on your proposition and the price point and the margins that you would expect from the service you're providing. You know, and certainly, well, at QuantSpark, everyone is an employee. We occasionally have specialist contractors, and we do have a few consulting associates in some ways, but we're largely kind of you know, full-time employee basis business. And the reason for that is because we wouldn't really make much of a margin otherwise, but then obviously that creates quite a significant, I suppose, fixed cost base. So I think really, without knowing more, it's kind of hard to answer. I think it pretty much depends on what type of consultancy you're running, on what your proposition is. But clearly either can work. And it also, I think, probably depends on the extent to which you have visibility of your pipeline and the need to scale quickly or not. There are other options too, including outsourcing or onshoring and all these sorts of things, but that's probably less suitable for consulting, maybe more suitable for engineering, for example.
Thank you. And then we've got one which I'm going to address to both of you. When you were starting your consultancy, who were your first hires? I don't know if that means actual names or roles. I imagine the latter.
We were three partners from early on, so ours were around other people that could deliver and manage clients. Essentially, that was our key focus in terms of our first few hires. I don't know about you, Adam.
Yeah, a bit different. So I was a freelance consultant myself, and had won some work through a recruitment consultancy. And they'd found two really good projects. One was for a PE fund, the other was for a major supermarket. And you know, those were a kind of couple of month projects and so on. And somehow, perhaps being opportunistic, managed to turn those into bigger projects. And then I hired some freelancers to support me in delivering that. So the kind of the route to growth for me was hiring some freelancers on a kind of fixed term basis, and then over time convincing them to become full-time employees, retaining profits and then growing that way. So a slightly different approach to Mark's. And I think that's the kind of the point to stress here. There are probably 101 different ways of kind of growing consultancy. I think there are some common principles that apply to all of them, but the precise route to growth will be different depending on whatever opportunity you're looking to exploit.
I totally agree. And in fact, it's just given rise to one framework that some of you may have heard of, which is, it's not very pretty, but essentially talks about grinding, minding, and finding. I don't know if you've come across that one, Adam, but you know, as you scale, the classic approach would be, you know, in the early days, you're doing the work, you're doing the grinding, and then as you bring other people in to do some of that delivery, you move into the minding. So you're checking that they're doing a great job, you're supporting them, but they're doing the grinding. And eventually you then move into doing the finding, which is finding new customers, and you bring people in to now do the minding, and you step. And then the ultimate, I guess, potential step, if you want to take it, is to move out of the finding as well and be focusing on innovation, and you know, being more non-executive and having a more investor mindset in terms of how you manage that business. That's kind of the journey, if you like, as it's often framed.
So actually, in terms of the journey and scaling consultancies, how did you scale your consultancy while maintaining profitability and keeping your clients happy? Is there a difficult balance there to kind of?
Well, I think I was smiling because it's incredibly difficult. You know, there's this sort of an iron triangle there, isn't there? In the sense that, you know, a lot of these things often there are trade-offs. But I think Mark's point about trying to build a system that scales so that you can extract yourself. You know, you work to your limit and then go to the next level, and you encourage everyone else to do the same. So I think that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build systems and processes often from scratch, whilst delivering work. It's tremendously difficult, challenging, and sometimes rewarding. But it is very difficult doing all those things all at once, which is why I actually think, you know, doing the hard work and growing the business organically is the only way really to do it properly. And ideally, you have the council of people who've kind of gone through their own journey and have lessons to learn, you know, lessons to share, because it's a difficult thing, but there are many thousands of people who've built successful consultancies. There's lots of people you can learn from.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything else to add on to?
Yeah, I mean, so your question is around how do you scale and sort of make money and keep clients happy. I think for me, there's a few aspects of that. One is, I believe you need to see sales as a craft, and you need to become expert at sales, right? Because that's your lifeline. That's what's going to pay the bills and pay the wages. So a real focus on selling if you're going to scale. A real focus on quality, and, you know, some classic metrics around Net Promoter Score or client effort score, and then acting on that client feedback so that you're continually developing your delivery model. And then it's really about sort of progressive systemization. So at Blue Sky, we developed what we call the Blue Sky Way, which meant we documented best practice and how we wanted our marketing done, our sales done, our delivery done, so that people had a reference point, so that as you scale, you're protecting the quality of what you deliver, because everybody has a reference as to and a guideline, if you like, which was continually then being improved and developed. And now there's software out there that can support you doing that. And I think also from a personal perspective, as a leader, you have to evolve your role continually as that journey, as you travel that path, because your role in the early days, as we just described, is different to then what it is when you bring in people that are managing others. And then when you're setting the agenda and you've got a proper management team, they've all got the functional responsibility, your role is different again. And part of what holds people back is hanging on to elements of their role. And I know for me, I loved, you know, running client projects, and particularly, you know, some big, juicy, complex ones, and was reluctant to kind of give that over. Sort of, you know, you sort of think, well, I'm probably the best person to do it, so I think I'm going to hang on to it. But that's no route to scale, right? So you've got to take some risks, and accept that things aren't going to be done the way that you maybe would have done them. But hopefully the results, you know, if you've got those sort of standardized processes in place, then hopefully they'll go well, you know, just maybe with a slightly different flavor.
Yeah, thank you. You have to understand that you can't actually, you know, replicate different versions of, or the same version of yourself. Another question's come in. Have you noticed any shift in how your key players want to be rewarded or incentivized over the past few years?
So for me, it's about how savvy your team are, right? And how aware they are of the value of equity. And, because we spend a fair bit of time advising owners in growing consulting firms at the network, my whole team is totally aware of all the different schemes and everything that can happen. And of course, they recognize, and so therefore they do see value in having an EMI scheme. I think for many years in my consulting business, people they don't think about that. A lot of the stuff that doesn't even cross their minds. Obviously, the more senior people tend to. So I don't know to what degree new generations. It'd be interesting to hear Adam's perspective on the different generations as to whether they're looking for different types of reward. I think there's definitely, I would say, a shift towards work-life balance. I think it was expected when I was a junior consultant. I lived away from home for like 6 weeks, working out of in a porter cabin or, staying in a Premier Inn hotel type scenario. With the onset of COVID and everybody working virtually, I know certain members have really struggled when everything went back to being face to face. Staff just didn't want to go. They didn't want to go to the client. That's not what they'd signed up for. They joined the company in a virtual context and weren't prepared to go and do it. So I think there's certainly aspects around expectation, around utilization, and how hard people are going to work, how many hours and how much, frankly, disruption you're able to put into someone's life. Because I couldn't go to tennis on a Wednesday evening when I was in Glasgow or Manchester for 6 weeks at a time. You gave up on trying to have any kind of that frequency. Whereas I think with the virtual world, the balance has shifted and people have got all that stuff in place, and it's almost like work becomes secondary. That's partly my experience.
So have you seen any companies that are fully remote doing it really well and sort of overcoming those challenges? Because I think, having worked in the 90s, 2000s, it is very, very different. Vested is now fully remote. I used to work in Soho at Yahoo at big agencies, and it was a very, very different feeling. And I think it's difficult to, that there are ups and downs in both. But have you seen anyone really sort of nailing it in the from a cultural point of view and a productivity point of view, working remotely?
Absolutely. I think so one of our members, Ivy House, is a leadership development company, and they have very deliberately thought through the strategy to retain connection across the team, despite the fact that they're all over the country. They're largely virtual. So they have, a Monday every month where they come together. There's a structure, there's, inspiration, and they have times where they're socializing, and it's properly thought through. I don't think you can leave that to chance, because, oh, well, we're all in the office on, for X amount. So it can just happen. It's not like that anymore. It has to be properly thought through, and it's a key part, I think, of any people's strategy.
Yeah. So Adam, as a younger generation, what shift have you noticed in terms of, incentive reward, if you have?
Well, I think quite rightly, there's much more interest in understanding kind of purpose and identity and ownership and involvement, and actually, I think this is all very positive. These. I mean, certainly when I was kind of in my early 20s, I worked, very long hours and was often, be in Premier Inns and all this sort of stuff as well. I kind of quite enjoyed it in a way. And there are still plenty of people around who are kind of, want to work like that. But I think there is a real need as leaders for us to communicate what that purpose is, and that's no bad thing. In terms of working from the office or working from home, I think that kind of depends entirely on the culture that you have in a particular company. And in terms of incentivizing great performance, again, there are many ways of doing this. At QuantSpark, we use vested and have a share option scheme as one of the benefits that we provide. We find the thing that most of our team prefer is quite a large training budget. So we have £500 a month training budget for everybody, and we have to make sure everyone has enough time to actually use that budget. So I think ideally you have a kind of a menu of options which are suitable for the diverse range of members of the team. because it may well be, especially if someone, for example, is looking to get a mortgage, they would rather have a higher salary because banks obviously look at the mortgage and therefore equity is sort of not very valuable for them. But potentially later on in their life, maybe that is. So I think really you want a menu of options that you can vary depending on people's particular circumstances. And ideally you can offer a number of things to them. And I think, you know, a good thing about Vested, it makes it very easy, right, to kind of calibrate this to suit particular preferences. And I think that's the key to this, to have a number of options and a toolbox of ways of incentivizing and rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, I've just looked at the time and we have been talking for an hour. So thank you so much. If anyone's got any final questions before I ask my final question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. So my final question to you both is, if you could go back to the beginning of your journey and give yourselves one piece of advice, knowing what you know now, what would it be?
After you, Adam.
Really difficult questions. I think I'd be slightly less financially conservative with the business and take slightly more risk early on in hiring more senior people.
Interesting. Or maybe rewarding them with equity early on.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So take more risks earlier on. And is that what you advise your clients as well?
Well, we try.
Mark?
Mine would be proposition focused, so I would go narrower sooner. We were quite broad for quite a long time, and credit to my ex-marketing director who nagged and nagged me to try and get me to go narrow, and I refused. So that was my mistake. I publicly acknowledge that I got that wrong, and that's what I would do differently. Go tighter on sales and service transformation and lose a load of the other stuff that we used to do.
Okay, so focus on your niche earlier, take more risks.
Yeah, and go deeper, like be really expert in that space, do loads of research, you know, build our reputation, you know, be the people that they come to for opinion. That would be what I would do differently. Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much, Mark and Adam, for sharing your expertise, your journey, and thank you also to everyone who's joined the session. We really appreciate your time and engagement. Just as a follow-up, we'll send everybody an email with the recording of the session and also a link to useful resources from Vested, from QuantSpark, and from Consultancy Growth Network. So thank you so much and have a lovely rest of your day.